What twisted urge turns a serene farm into a blood-soaked killing ground? Can devotion morph into sinister obsession that devours all humanity? That's what we're going to find out in this case of deception, fraud, and deadly greed. The sun was hanging low over the river that lazy summer afternoon in Illinois, casting a golden shimmer across the slow-moving water as Wayne and his younger brother Gary settled on the muddy bank with their fishing poles. The air smelled of wet earth and wild grass, the kind of scent that stuck to your clothes when you went inside, mixed with the faint tang of Wayne's cigarette smoke as he lit one up and handed Gary a cold soda from the battered cooler between them. They'd been out there since midday, lines bobbling idly in the current, not catching much, but not caring either. Those outings were never really about the fish. Wayne leaned back against a weathered oak stump, his lanky frame relaxed in a faded flannel shirt, and cracked open the conversation like he always did, talking about the trucking routes that he had mapped out in his head. "You know, Gary, one of these days I'm going to get that rig and hit the open road. Big hauls from Chicago to St. Louis," Wayne said. His voice gravelly from the years of hard laughs and harder work. His eyes were squinting against the glare as he reeled in the line just to cast it out again. Gary, a few years behind and still full of wide-eyed optimism, nodded eagerly, splashing his boots in the shadow edge where minnows darted. Wayne pictured it clear as day, at the wheel, navigating the miles, blurring past the cornfields and truck stops, free from the dead-end factory shifts that boxed him in. They swapped stories, too, Wayne ribbing Gary about the time he botched the carburetor's fix in a garage back home. Grease up to their elbows, both of them howling as the engine sputtered to life anyway. Or the bonfires in the yard, flames crackling high while they roasted marshmallows and plotted their escape from the Bloomington's grind. Wayne vowing to teach Gary stick shift the second he hit 16, promising it'd be their ticket out. Those talks made Gary feel anchored, like Wayne was the big brother who would always have his back, especially after their folks were gone, leaving just the two of them against the world. Gary had always looked up to Wayne, the one with the quick smile and the calloused hands who turned scraps into stories, making life feel like an adventure worth chasing together. When Wayne vanished in November 1986, after heading out for what he called a sure-thing job, Gary felt a gut-wrenching void, a mix of denial and rising panic that clawed at him every waking hour. He was desperate, haunted by the what-ifs. Had Wayne finally landed that big haul he had talked about by the river? Or was there something terrible holding him back from calling home? Guilt gnawed too. Gary wished he had pushed harder for Wayne to stay local, to chase those dreams together instead of letting his brother wander alone. Gary threw himself into the search right away, starting with calls to every police station from Illinois to Missouri, his voice cracking as he described Wayne's lanky build and the tattoo on his arm. He drove hundreds of miles, hitting up truck stops and homeless shelters along interstates, flashing faded photos and begging for any sighting of the man with the quick smile and calloused hands. Flyers went up on bulletin boards and diners and mission walls, even in Gary's own handwriting, pleaded for tips while he scoured newspapers for missing persons reports, his heart sinking deeper with every dead end. Months blurred into a fog of exhaustion and frayed hope. Gary barely sleeping as he crisscrossed states, convinced Wayne was out there, just needing one more lead to bring him home. It wasn't until the grim headlines about a Missouri farm that broke Gary's world and shattered it for good. The confirmation hitting like a freight train and leaving him to grieve the brother who had been his best friend, forever lost to the unknown. Welcome. I'm a licensed professional counselor and I talk about the psychology behind the crimes. And today we're analyzing a case that's complex in its layers of control and compliance. Want to offer a trigger warning here. This case involves murder, fraud, and domestic abuse. Viewer discretion advised. Without further ado, let's pull back the curtains and unravel this haunting case together. This is the story of Ray and Faye Copeland. It started with a tip to the Crime Stoppers hotline in August 1989. In the small town of Mooresville, Missouri, something unthinkable was unfolding. Ray and Faye Copeland, an elderly couple in their late 60s and 70s, ran a modest 40-acre home, raising cattle and living what looked like a straightforward rural existence. But underneath the surface, a dark secret was waiting to be uncovered. A secret that would expose a calculated operation and leave a community questioning how well they knew their neighbors. This is not just a story of murder. It's a story of manipulation and the bonds that hold people in harmful patterns, and the investigators who piece together the evidence to seek justice. As we go through this, I'll share my thoughts on the mental health aspects, but remember, these are just my speculations based on the known facts. It's not a diagnosis. Psychology and mental health often intersect in cases like this, showing early experiences can shape behavior over decades. Let's start by looking at who Ray and Faye were before everything came to light. Ray Copeland was born on December 30th, 1914 in Salasos, Oklahoma. His family faced the hardships of the Great Depression early on, moving often in search of steady work. Ray, the oldest of three siblings, left school after the 4th grade to help support them, taking on odd jobs in the farming and labor. On the surface, his upbringing appeared as a product of tough times, with parents Jess and Laney doing what they could to keep the family afloat. But reports from later years suggest Ray showed early signs of defiance and a disregard for the rules. For example, at around age 20, he stole 2 hogs from his own father's farm and sold them in nearby town. Jess discovered it but chose not to press charges, possibly to avoid a family scandal. Now, this is where we see the patterns that come up in many cases involving long-term criminal behavior: early boundary testing and a lack of accountability. No formal diagnosis was ever given for Ray, but his actions point to possible antisocial traits where empathy takes a back seat to personal gain. Experts in criminal psychology often link such behaviors to unstable environments, where survival feels like a zero-sum game. Here's the thing: Ray never sought or received any kind of intervention for these tendencies. His parents overlooked the theft, and as he grew, so did the stakes of his choices. This blend of economic pressure and unchecked impulses laid the groundwork for a lifetime of escalating risk. Faye Della Wilson entered the picture in 1940. She was born on October 4th, 1921, in a poor cabin in McDonald County, Missouri. Her parents, Rufus and Gladys, raised 7 kids amid constant financial strain, emphasizing hard work and obedience. Faye, described by family as reserved and compliant, met Ray at a doctor's office when she was 19. Their relationship moved fast. They married just 6 months later on April 10, 1940. The couple soon started a family, having 5 children: sons Everett, Billy Ray, Alva, and William Wayne, and daughter Betty Lou. To the outside, Faye seemed like a steady homemaker, managing the home while Ray pursued work. But inside the household, tensions built quickly. The children later recounted an environment marked by Ray's harsh temper, with physical punishments and verbal outbursts directed at Faye and them. Everett remembered hiding from Ray's rages, while Betty Lou described beatings that left bruises. From a mental health standpoint, this points to cycles of abuse that can foster deep-seated fear and dependency. Faye's background in a strict and poverty-stricken home may have normalized endurance over escape. With no professional help involved, the family moved frequently: Arkansas, Oklahoma, back to Missouri, as Ray's troubles mounted. By the 1950s, Ray's arrest for theft and bad checks had him in and out of prison, totaling over 10 years served. Faye took jobs like factory work and motel cleaning to keep things going. The kids fended for themselves often, with some, like Billy Ray, leaving home young to join the military. Ray's pattern solidified. He targeted rural opportunities, like livestock theft where quick sales meant easy money. In 1966, they bought the Mooresville farm for $12,000. Neighbors saw Ray as irritable. He'd yelled at service workers or hit stray animals. But Fay is withdrawn, focusing on gardening. This setup allowed Ray to expand his schemes without drawing much notice. Psychologically, Ray's persistence, despite repeated convictions, suggests a strong drive for control, possibly rooted in his unstable youth. Fay's role evolved into quiet support, which could reflect trauma responses like accommodation to avoid conflict. These early dynamics set a troubling course, one that would draw in outsiders years later. As Ray entered his later years, his focus sharpened on the farm's potential for profit. He had been banned from livestock auctions since 1960s for bad checks, so he adapted by recruiting help. To outsiders in Mooresville, the Copelands were just an older pair tending to their land, with Ray handling chores and Fay keeping the house. But privately, Ray's frustrations boiled over in ways that isolated the family further. For instance, the children avoided long visits, citing Ray's controlling nature over finances and decisions. Their daughter recalled an incident in the 1970s where Ray broke Fay's arm during an argument, though no reports were filed. This ongoing dynamic created a home where fear dictated daily life, and Ray began targeting transients from shelters in Kansas City and St. Joseph, offering $300 a week, plus room and board. These men, often in tough spots, saw it as a break. Ray drove them to local banks to open accounts, then to auctions in places like Richmond, where they'd buy cattle on credit that wouldn't hold. He'd flip the animals fast, cash in hand before banks caught on. And the workers? Ray dismissed them once their part ended, until he realized they could talk. Fay managed the home front, logging names and hire dates in their notebook. Those X marks appeared after certain departures. From what we know, Ray's choice of vulnerable recruits shows a calculated eye for low-risk targets. Mentally, this escalation from fraud to elimination hints at a deepening detachment where people become disposable. Fay's participation, like noting details, might stem from years of conditioning under Ray's dominance. In mental health terms, prolonged exposure to abuse can lead to a kind of alignment for self-preservation. The farm's remoteness, 40 acres with neighbors off a mile, kept things hidden. Ray handled burials at night using lime to hasten decay. Fay reportedly assisted in covering sites. By 1985, a worker named Jerry confronted Ray over suspicions, and he left, prompting Ray to tighten control. No phones, no vehicles for hires. Fay's quilting hobby took a grim turn. She'd repurposed the men's clothes into patches after they vanished. Locals saw her sewing on the porch and thought nothing of it. Ray's abuse didn't let up. Sons like Alva described Fay with frequent black eyes and money locked away by Ray. This power imbalance extended through the operation, with Fay following directions without pushback. Profits rolled in, thousands by 1987, and funding a new tractor and barn fixes, but so did the volume, and more hires meant more risk. Enter Jack McCormick in the spring of 1989. It's a 52-year-old from Ohio, down on his luck. He ran the auction run twice, then Ray led him to a field, handed over the .22 rifle for target practice. Jack sensed trouble, refused. Ray fired anyway, but missed. Jack bolted into the woods, hid, then he hitchhiked out. His call detailed the farm, the bones he spotted, and a near miss. Police cross-checked Ray's record. 36 arrests since 1934, mostly fraud, and associations confirmed his auction bans. The shift from scams to killings covered 32 months. Ray, aged 71 to 75, and Fay, 65 to 68. Their isolation in Mooresville, a population under 100, shielded the sounds of shots and digging. Ray's mindset seemed fixed on gain above all, a trait echoing his Depression-era survival lessons. Fay's compliance raises questions of eroded autonomy. where resistance felt impossible after decades. Cracks showed as hiders grew bolder and suspicious, but the couple pressed on until that hotline call. As we turn to the heart of what happened between October 1986 and May 1989, I have to pause and reflect on how these acts weren't just crimes. They were the culmination of a calculated system that preyed on vulnerability. And it's tough to discuss without acknowledging the human cost first. In my work as a counselor, I've seen how patterns of exploitation can erode lives over time. And here, Ray and Faye's scheme evolved from simple fraud into something irreversible, claiming at least 5 lives with a precision that speaks to cold intent. Their method was straightforward but ruthless. Ray would lure drifters from homeless missions, promising steady farm work and $200 a week plus room and board. Men who were already down on their luck and far from anyone who might notice their absence. These weren't random targets. They were transients, often without strong ties, making them ideal for Ray's bad check operations at cattle auctions, where the men would open accounts, bid high on livestock, and watch the checks bounce before Ray flipped the animals for cash. But once the deed was done, Ray couldn't risk them talking, so he executed them. Shot in the back of the head with his .22 caliber Martin bolt action rifle, a weapon later found in their home and ballistically matched to every bullet. Faye played her part too, logging their names in that ledger with those ominous X's next to the ones who wouldn't leave alive, and even turning scraps of their clothing into a quilt. A detail that still gives me pause as a professional trying to make sense of such detachment. Let's honor the men involved because in true crime, we owe it to them to remember they were more than footnotes. Start with Dennis Keith Murphy, just 27 from Normal, Illinois, when he vanished in October 1986. He had been a welder until factory layoffs hit hard, leaving him drifting and desperate enough to take Ray's offer from a Kansas City shelter. He opened that bank account on October 10th, bought 10 heifers at auction, and 3 days later, the check bounced. By October 17th, Ray had shot him and dumped his body in a well, weighted with a chain and a concrete block to sink it deep. Dennis was a quiet type, the kind who would send letters home when he could, but his mother waited in vain, her worry turning to a lifetime of ache after identification via x-rays showed the odd shape of his jaw. Then there was Wayne Warner, in his early 30s from Bloomington, Illinois, arriving mid-November 1986 after a trucking accident sidelined him for good. He needed the cash bad, so he signed on, opened an account at Farmers Bank, snapped up the cows on November 15th, and Ray sold them the next day before the fraud surfaced. By November 19th, Wayne lay in a shallow grave near the barn, a single .22 round to the head, his brother combing shelters for months in futile hope. His fingerprints finally confirmed it, but that delay only deepened the family's helplessness. Fast forward to October 1988, and Jimmy Dale Harvey, 27, a Springfield, Missouri local known for his big heart, he would share his last cigarette with another drifter without a second thought. Jimmy had bounced between farm gigs, so Ray's pitch landed easy. He bought cattle on October 20th, and the scam hummed along. But Ray tied it off on October 25th with a shot and a burial in a sinkhole. Decomposition hiding him until dental records pulled from weeks after his family first reported him missing. Vigils in Springfield kept his name alive, but the pain of not knowing sooner lingered for his loved ones. John W. Freeman followed in the late November 1988, another 27-year-old from Boonville, Indiana, carrying his harmonica everywhere, fresh from a divorce that left him adrift. He opened his account December 1st, snagged steers at the Hamilton auction for Ray's $1,200 profit, but on December 8th, it ended in that old 50-foot well, waterlogged but preserved enough for his ex-wife to spot his harmonica among the farm's grin haul. Finally, Paul Jason Cowart, the youngest in his early 20s, from Dardendale, Arkansas. He hitchhiked into Missouri in May of 1989, a high school dropout eyeing a clean slate. Ray scooped him up near a shelter, Paul ran the scam for 15 calves, check bouncing fast, and nights later, a bullet sent him to a shallow grave near the others. His parents left to bury an empty casket. These five, Dennis, Wayne, Jimmy, John, Paul, weren't faceless. They were sons with dreams cut short, their transient past making them easy marks, but no less deserving of remembrance. Psychologically, targeting them reveals a predator's instinct for the isolated, where Ray's lifelong entitlement met Faye's enabling role, perhaps numbed by her own trauma into seeing these men as expendable too. The community in Mooresville felt the shockwave when whispers turned to headlines. A town of 130, where doors stayed unlocked, now bolted, parents pulling kids from the roads near the Copeland place. Auctions ramped up security, demanding IDs before bounce checks could emerge. But the real gut punch was the family's frustration. Why no quicker action on missing reports? Mary Murphy drove hours from Illinois to plead for news on Dennis. Wayne's brother posted rewards that went nowhere. Jimmy's folks lit candles in Springfield vigils. John's ex clung to that harmonica as proof. Paul's parents faced an empty grave service that broke them. The farm's seclusion, 40 acres, buffered by fields, let bodies decompose fast, animals scattering bones while Ray reloaded after each shot, and Faye scrubbed the kitchen floors where some killings happened, her quilt patches from their plaid auction shirts sewn with eerie care. It wasn't frenzy, it was business. Profits from $500 to $2,000 per scam. They funded fences in 87 and Faye's greenhouses in 88. Greed silencing witnesses without sexual motives, just pure elimination and profit. The attic stash of 50 items. It was wallets and tools, Jimmy's dog photo, John's sheet music. Paul's unsent letter home humanized what Ray treated as trash. It all started to come apart. The way authorities piece it together shows real persistence in the face of doubt. It really kicked off with that call from Jack McCormick back in late August 1989, a guy who had been through his own rough patches, but had details that couldn't be easily dismissed. Jack wasn't a pristine witness. He had his own history with bad checks, which made the local sheriff's office in Livingston County hesitate at first. But when deputies sat down with him in Kansas City, showing him photos and listening to his story about spotting bones near a tree stump and dodging a bullet from Ray's rifle, something clicked. They pulled Ray's file, 36 arrests stretching back to 1934, mostly for fraud, and it lined up too neatly with what Jack described. Livestock groups confirmed Ray had been blacklisted from auctions since the mid-60s for bouncing checks, which painted a picture of a man who had been scheming for decades. So on August 25th, they drove out to the farm unannounced, hoping to catch Ray and Faye off guard. Ray shut down hard, insisting he never hired drifters, while Faye just stayed quiet in the background. But little things didn't add up. The fresh mud on Ray's truck suggested he had been out to remote spots recently. Back at the office, they subpoenaed bank records and hit pay dirt. 23 bounced checks from 1986 to 1989, all tied to brand new accounts opened by men whose names matched entries in Faye's notebook. By September 15th, Jack positively identified Ray from the lineup photos, which sealed the deal for a search warrant issued on October 6th from the circuit court. The operation launched October 7th, pulling in 50 officers from the state police, with FBI forensics on call and bloodhounds brought in from Kansas City. And those dogs went straight to work around 9 a.m., alerting near the barn where they uncovered Dennis Murphy's remains, complete with a clear entry wound on the skull. 50 feet away, Wayne Warner's body surfaced, decomposition putting his death back to 1986. Jimmy Harvey came next from a sinkhole, matched by dental records to that October 1988 disappearance. Rain forced a pause, but they picked up on October 14th, pulling John Freeman from a 50-foot well, his body somewhat preserved by the water, and Paul Coward right by the stump Jack had mentioned. In the bedroom closet, they found the Marlin 22 rifle, its serial number tracing back to a 1970s purchase by Ray, and ballistics confirmed it fired every fatal shot. Faye's list turned up in the kitchen drawer. 12 names, hire dates, and those telling X's, while the quilt on the bed had 5 patches directly linking to the victim's clothes, like Dennis's plaid shirt and Wayne's jeans. Arrest happened on October 17th. Ray smirked and repeated, "You'll find nothing on my place." But Faye broke down in tears, claiming she knew nothing about any of it. That fell apart fast when she couldn't explain why she lied about the men quitting after payday. Autopsies at the University of Missouri verified the 22 headshots with no other injuries and the clean toxicology screens. Notifying families was heartbreaking. Dennis's mom identified him through x-rays, Wayne via fingerprints. Jimmy's sister flew in immediately. John's ex spotted his harmonica in the evidence, and Paul's wallet clenched his. It wasn't smooth sailing, though. These victims came from multiple states, and their transient lives meant missing dental records or next of kin contacts, stretching the small local force thin. Jurisdictional snags popped up too, with the FBI stepping in for support but letting locals lead. Media frenzy hit after the first bodies. ABC News on October 10th swarmed the site, complicating the second search. But it brought tips. Shelter workers remembered Ray cruising for hires. Auction clerks recalled seeing transients with him. Those 7 other names on Faye's list, like Jerry B. and Tom M., stayed ghost. No bodies, no leads. The 1990s era DNA tech couldn't salvage the decomposed remains, and digging the full 40 acres only turned up animal bones. Ray's shed held the smoking gun for fraud. Checkbooks and forged IDs, proving a $30,000 haul. That list and quilt? They transform a check-kidding probe into a full-blown murder case, with prosecutor Don Gilman framing Faye as an accomplice and Ray as a driving force. The sheriff's team worked around the clock, fueled by families' desperate pleas, and when it wrapped, those same families offer public gratitude. Still, the scars from the delays and doubts ran deep, a reminder of how overlooked lives can slip through the cracks. The trials in 1990 and 1991 marked the end of the line for Ray and Faye, pulling back the curtain on a partnership built on decades of dysfunction. Faye's case started on November 1st in Benton County Warsaw courtroom, where her defense hammered home the idea of an abused wife blind to Ray's worst. But the quilt, the ledger, and her shifting stories about the missing men convinced the jury otherwise. She was hit with 5 first-degree murder convictions. Death sentences for 4 counts, life without parole on the 5th, making them the oldest couple ever handed the death penalty in America. Ray's turn came March 7, 1991. The evidence parade was the same, and he walked out guilty on all 5, facing lethal injection. His reaction? A casual, "I'm okay," like it was just another bad day on the farm. As a licensed professional counselor, I want to emphasize that these are only my speculations, as not a diagnosis. But looking at Ray, his trajectory fits patterns that we've studied in psychopathy. That cold exploitation, the surface charm hiding ruthless acts, all without a flicker of regret. From hog thefts as a kid to these killings, it traces a steady climb into antisocial behavior, maybe seated in that depression grind where grabbing what you could felt like the only way to eat. His abusiveness toward Faye and the kids, that screams a core need for dominance, turning relationships into tools for control rather than connection. Faye's side is tougher to unpack. Layer with the long shadow of the abuse her children detailed. Regular beatings, broken bones, a life where Ray held the purse strings tight. It points to learned helplessness, a slow erosion of choice after 50 years of survival mode, where going along kept the peace, even if it meant complicity. But those active steps, the X's in the ledger, stitching victim clothes into a quilt, suggest she wasn't fully in the dark. Perhaps a trauma bond locked her in, blurring lines between victim and enabler. Or she even just shared a worldview just to justify it all. The quilt stands out to me as particularly puzzling from a psychological angle. Was it some subconscious way to process the horror, turning remnants into something tangible, or a quiet calm on the events? Her turning down plea deals, even with chances for lighter time, could speak to denial, a fierce loyalty to Ray, or maybe something both tangled up. Faye's trial stretched 11 days, her lawyers pushing battered woman syndrome hard. Her son Everett laid it out. Dad beat Mom regular as clockwork. Her daughter Betty Lou added she lived scared every single day. Prosecutors fired back with the quilt, which Faye owned up to, but she stuck to denying the killings. The 12-person jury came back on November 16th with guilty verdicts. The Missouri Supreme Court upheld it in the State versus Copeland that year, though they flagged the abuse evidence as underdeveloped. Then in 1999, an appeals court flipped the death penalties for Faye, saying the jury hadn't gotten the full picture on a battered woman dynamics, dropping her to life without parole. Ray's week-long trial featured the rifle, the bullets, and the ledger front and center. Jack took the stand, reliving his escape, and another survivor, David, shared how Ray bragged about handling problems. After 4 hours, the jury said guilty across the board. The judge handed down death on March 18th. Appeals bounced off the Missouri Supreme Court in 1992. Ray didn't last long on death row. He passed on October 19, 1993, cremated with no ceremony. Faye had a stroke in August 2002 that left her paralyzed and speechless. Governor Bob Holden approved medical parole in September 2002, sending her to a nursing home. She slipped away on December 23, 2003, at 82. For the victims' families, closure came unevenly. Jimmy Harvey's relatives found a measure of peace in confirming his fate and laying him to rest. But those 7 unnamed on the list, they still weigh heavy, with no breakthroughs from DNA tech even today. This case nudged Missouri forward in 1990, passing laws for better shelter ID checks and photo verifications at auctions. It spotlighted how marginalized folks like transients fall through safety nets, sparking pushes for stronger protection and awareness. Mooresville healed gradually. The farm sold at auction in 1991. The barn torn down to erase the stain. The town's numbers crept up a bit, but a quiet wariness stuck around. Yearly memorials for the victims started in 1995 with families showing up. Dennis Murphy's sister talked about how lives were too easily overlooked. Faye's appeal echoed in the cases like the State versus Norman in 2001. Ray never confessed. Faye stayed silent to the end. Their kids pulled away. Everett changed his name for a fresh start. Betty Lou penned a 2005 memoir unpacking the abuse's lasting echo. From a mental health view, Ray's 1950 prison psych notes flagged antisocial tendencies, but no treatment followed. Faye's post-trial evaluation revealed depression and hints of PTSD. That quilt? In my speculation, it might have been her way of reworking the trauma, piecing something from the pieces left behind. The whole saga leaves echoes, a caution about threats hiding right under our noses. What draws me back to this case time and again is how it lays bare the subtle hold of control in places we least expect. Ray and Faye weren't flashy villains. They were the quiet grandparents next door, yet their choices carved out devastation that still touches lives. Families like Paul Colbert's and John Freeman's have shouldered that grief for over 3 decades now. Some channel it into memorials or pushing for better safeguards for the wandering souls society forgets. After the verdicts, Mooresville gathered for town halls, hashing out the dangers lurking even in the wide-open country. Shelters rolled out protocols, vetting potential employers more rigorously. And that old farm, it's just cornrows today, no signs marking the past, though locals carry the memory close. Faye's children made tentative steps toward mending fences, visiting her in the nursing home before she passed. Forgiveness crept in, but the scars never fully faded. Resolution landed uneven. The 5 identified victims got proper burials and some semblance of goodbye, while those 7 cold cases sit with the FBI, waiting for a break that may never come. In the end, the Copeland story nudges us to peer a little closer at the people around us. Ray's iron grip on Faye underscores how domestic abuse can twist into broader criminal paths, fueling actions that harm far beyond the home. It's a tough reminder of how mental health struggles and unresolved trauma can knot together in ways that lead to tragedy. So what stands out to you here? How do you think Ray and Faye kept the front up for so long? Do you see Faye as more of a fellow perpetrator or someone caught up in the web? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I make it a point to read every one. And if you got a case you would like me to tackle next, let me know. Thank you for joining me today, and until next time, stay curious, stay safe.